All right, good morning, and welcome to the 47th ever Sunday Assembly in San Diego. Before we get started today, I want to make sure you know that we have a media-free zone. We are recording the event, so if you do not want to participate in that particular endeavor, please sit over on this side of the assembly here. Every Sunday Assembly has a theme, and the theme for this Sunday Assembly is Antsy. And now, Antsy is a synonym for anxious, and a lot of us have been anxious. For instance, we're very anxious today because we are unusually flying without our heart and soul. Our musical leader, Mr. Paul Svensson, is off attending his father's memorial service today, so we wish him the very best of luck, and we certainly miss him. And you probably see we have on the, we wanted to make sure we had a song, so you see the lyrics for Build Me Up Buttercup right there, and we just found out the video that we had planned for that won't play, so I just want to make sure you have the complimentary Build Me Up Buttercup lyrics to take home with you today, so if you got nothing else out of this, that's what you got out of it. Every Sunday Assembly has a theme, as I said, and today is Antsy, and we because people are anxious, but also we have a talk about ants today, and that's really all we could think of. So that's where we are.
We're the kings and
My name is Stephen Soden.
I'm Alexis Record, and I love puns, so Antsy was my favorite theme of all time, and the programming committee loved it so much they just had to have it, and they were really excited about it. It wasn't just all me. Sunday Assembly is a radically inclusive secular community that meets monthly to hear inspirational talks. I'm reading this so it'll be official, so I don't go off the rails. That meets monthly to hear inspirational talks, connect for service projects, sing songs, and generally celebrate life. Assemblies are free to attend, and everyone is welcome. We welcome all who welcome all. Is this anyone's first time ever here? Raise your hand or nod your head. All right.
Give those people a high five. Welcome to Sunday Assembly. The theme for a Sunday Assembly, we turn around there. Live better, help often, and wonder more. That was very nice. You did that. A walking billboard. Well, since we don't have Paul today, and this is a little unusual for those of you that are new to us, we have a song, and we start right off with a rousing song in the middle, a song in the end, which we were skipping today, but it gives us a chance to talk a little bit about Sunday Assembly in general.
Pretend you had a good time.
Well, if somebody is really hot to lead Build Me Up Buttercup, we have the music, we just don't have the video that went with it, which was a guy singing in the car with joy and alacrity.
We're a well-oiled machine.
We'll sing it. We'll figure it out. Denise says she's going to lead it. We're going to sing it. I heard that. Okay, well, Sunday Assembly started when two comedians, Sanderson Jones and Pippa Evans, were in a small car on their way to Bath for a gig. And they both discovered that they were interested in something like a church that was accepting of everybody no matter what you believed. And so the first ever Sunday Assembly was started. The first one they had was in Islington in the United Kingdom, and over 200 people showed up. They were very, very surprised. And the next one, there was 300 people showed up. And soon, right now, they're filling Conway Hall, which is this famous hall where Disraeli and many other famous speakers are. They have about 500 people at the London Assembly, but not quality like we have here. Soon there was over 80 assemblies in 8 countries. That's where we are right now. And there are more than a couple assemblies here in the United States. For instance, there's an assembly in Albuquerque, in Atlanta, in Austin, and also in Baltimore, and Bellingham, and Bloomington, in Boise, and in Boston. There's a Sunday assembly in, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. And you know, what's high in the middle and round on the outside? Ohio, well represented as Sunday Assembly. And there was Charlottesville and Chapel Hill. There's a Sunday Assembly in Denver and Dallas. There's a Sunday Assembly in East Bay. And don't forget the Sunday Assembly in Knoxville, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, Madison, New York. Nashville has a Sunday Assembly. There's one in Orange County, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. There's 5 in Southern California. Pennsylvania, Phoenix, Portland have Sunday assemblies. Pittsburgh has a Sunday assembly. Rochester, Seattle, Seacoast in New Hampshire. There's one in state capital, Sacramento. Silicon Valley, been around for a very long time. They have a Sunday assembly. There's a Sunday assembly in Walla Walla, Washington. And speaking of Washington, there is a Sunday assembly in Washington, D.C. And the 3rd accredited assembly in the 5-year history of Sunday Assembly is right here in San Diego, California, Sunday Assembly San Diego, and we are so glad you are here.
I wish you knew more about Sunday Assembly, because that would really be beneficial for an MC. One thing I really love about Sunday Assembly is that we share our lives. It's part of community. And I know the original founders, 2 comedians, you're still here, we're founded by comedians, that's amazing. They wanted to celebrate life, so they would share all the positive things that happened. But when we do our Life Happens, it can be anything. It can be a negative thing. It can be Paul is at a memorial for his father. That's a Life Happens. An exciting Life Happens is that Leah, wherever she went over there, has applied to grad school. And then we had another Life Happens, another sad one. Elizabeth broke her humerus, and which is why her Life Happens is written on my hand, because she can't write or lift her arm very well, and she lives alone. So maybe if you want to help her out, go see her, give her gentle hugs, gentle hugs. And that is all our Life Happens so far. Next on the docket, we have our reading. Free childcare. There is a media-free zone. Man, we're really with it without our precious, precious screens. This one's a screen for ants.
Obviously, our tech is a little bit different today, so we do have a media-free zone. We talk about that, and we can watch kids age 1.5 and up. So if you parents would like a brief respite from your lovely children, please come to Sunday Assembly, and we have professional child care people in the other room and projects and such like that.
Yeah, and you can see them, and they can see you, and they wave a lot. That's my son. Has anybody seen Zoolander? There's a screen for ants. You can't even fit in this. Okay. Thank you. If we could have our readers come up, we also like to share things that inspire us. And our readers for our Kimmy Walters poems, did we get those picked out? In order. I don't know who's first.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Lowell. This poem is I Think About Hurting You by Kimmy Walters. I think about sharpening the air in your room at night so you can't dream. I think about dismembering your name and burying it letter by letter until it's just a fresh white suck of breath. I think about carving your face into a block of salt and waiting for deer to come. I think about whether or not I am good. I blink once and everything and everywhere replaces itself with something identical.
Such a thing. I tried to wear eyeshadow once, but the dust kept falling into the creases under my eyes, and I looked punched in the face. The house was completely quiet, and I was alone, and I felt punched in the face. When I am sleeping in one half of my bed, I imagine you sleeping in one half of your bed, with your music on, your TV on, busy things in your room, with static electricity in your hair, with a ribbon of closed captioning nudging its way out of your television and winding around your neck like a scarf.
Make. Starting now, I'm only printing my resume with edible ink and only onto big cakes. And if you don't give me an interview, a woman is going to come out of the cake, like happens at parties for rich, stupid, hungry men on television. Then more women with sharp parts and laughing eyes will come out of the cake. And then more and more until you are scared and run outside to call the police or the media or your mom. Anyway, that's when we rob you.
I think the crazy eyes did that poem. We are very lucky to have Terry with us. Terry McGlynn drove all the way down from Dominguez Hills, which is about an hour and a half north, but it's in Southern California traffic, so we're very happy he's with us. He is a research associate for the National History Museum of LA County. He is a professor of biology at CSU Dominguez Hills. He talks about rainforests and ants and nature in our cities, and we have provided him graciously a tiny ant-sized screen. So I'd like to introduce Dr. McGlynn.
Hey, thanks for having me. I brought a little demo, by the way, I'll pass around. So these are some bullet ants, by the way. So if they kind of stretch out, they're about maybe the size of your thumb. They're like one of the biggest ants in the world. There are bigger ones, but no meaner ones. Yeah, I'm a professor of ants. And so when you meet people at social occasions, you go through the routine of like, oh, so what do you do? What do you do? I find it amazing that a majority of the time, and I'm not kidding, I often get the same response, especially from people in Southern California, which is, it inevitably comes out that I'm like traveling the world to exotic places to study ants. Like, well, you study ants, well, you should come to my kitchen, right? And of course, I would imagine that half of you might have been thinking that because that's what half the people tell me, right? And so actually, I like that response in a way. It means something, because it speaks to a universality of our experience, and that we all tend to have that experience to some extent, although maybe your kitchen is better caulked than mine. But we have that one common experience thanks to the fact that many decades ago, the Argentine ant was introduced into Southern California and follows people wherever we go. And also it kicks out pretty much all the other native ants readily found. And so that's why we all have this common shared experience with this one ant in our homes and backyards and wherever we go. Unless you really get out into nature in San Diego County, all you're really gonna find are Argentine ants. And so, by contrast, if you go to a tropical rainforest, it's extraordinarily different. So there's this one place I work in Costa Rica, and I've been working down there for 25 years or so. And there's this guy who spent more than 20 years of his career dedicated, for good reasons, to try to figure out how many kinds of ants exist in this one patch of forest. There's just about 50 kilometers of trail intersecting. You could walk around this forest in a day. And it turns out that he's found to date like 436 or so species of ants in this one particular place. And so these are extraordinarily specialized. So when people go, oh, well, you study ants, you should come to my kitchen. It seems like a weird thing. But the thing is, if you happen to be in a rainforest, and you're meeting someone who's a professor of ants, you're like, oh, well, of course you're a professor of ants. Look at all these ants. They're running everything. How would you not want to understand what they're doing? So there are so many specialized kinds of ants in the forest. Some we've only discovered live underground in soil and they never ever come above ground. We only knew they existed once we developed techniques to dig big pits and have sampling traps underground. There's some that spend their entire lives up in the canopy. Unless you go up in the canopy or you fog or you climb, then you'd never really sample them. Some colonies could nest easily inside a thimble. There are ones that are nesting just within the twigs and sticks of the leaf litter and forage food in the leaf litter. Some that live in the soil and look in the leaf litter, which is why my lab website is leaflitter.org, by the way. And there are some ants that have co-evolved with plants so that they're with one particular plant species, that these plants require the ants to live upon it to defend them. And also the ants depend upon these plants for food. So without the plants, the ants die, and without the ants, the plants die. And there are many, many of these co-evolved ant-plant relationships. There's so many specialized interactions among ants and in the tropics. And so when you go to the rainforest, there are so many kinds. Thanks. And so there's, as far as I know, there's only 3 kinds of ants that are masters of more than one domain, where they both rule the ground and they also rule the canopy. And so one kind are army ants, which are these massive colonies of hundreds of thousands of ants, like maybe 400,000 ants. In Africa, army ants could have like colonies of like 10 million, but in the New World tropics, it's more like, 500,000 ants. And so these ants will roam through the forest floor, but also readily up into the canopy to eat whatever they're eating. Another kind of ant, which is both conquered the ground and the sky, are leafcutter ants. And they did this through agriculture. So they will have these big colonies, and like, imagine the area where we're all sitting right here. Imagine this big, but also that deep going underground, and it would have 500,000 ants. That would be like a colony of leafcutter ants. And so there's a smaller one at the safari park, by the way, I think, right? And so, but they will walk like a quarter mile sometimes up to the top of a tree and cut leaves and bring them back down. And they don't eat these leaves, but then they feed them to a fungus, which they use to feed everybody in the colony. And that's been studied a whole bunch. And so the third, no, we're good. Oh, well, you went anyway, it's okay. So here's a bullet ant, just like the one I passed around. And there's my student Erica working with that one. And so bullet ants are the third kind of ant which have mastered the ground and the sky. And they don't have these colonies of hundreds of thousands of individuals. It's just maybe a few thousand at most for a large colony. But the ants themselves have so much biomass. They're so chunky and huge. The third or fourth largest species of ant in the world for the most part. And so these bullet ants nest at the base of canopy trees, and then they forage up into the canopy to forage. About 20 or so years ago, generally speaking, we learned that all of these ants that hang out in the canopy are not really that predaceous, but they're primarily what people call herbivores. And so they mostly eat sugar in the form of nectar from the trees, which actually are feeding the ants, or in the form of honeydew, which is basically leftover sugar that's pooped out the butts of things like aphids and caterpillars who are feeding on plant sugar in the leftover waste. So just to give you an idea for scale how these are compared to, right? So that's a spider, compared to the head of a bullet ant, right? That's a little jumping spider. So a lot of insects in the rainforest are tiny. So these bullet ants, like almost all other ants in the canopy, are collecting sugar and then bringing that sugar down home to eat. And so it's been a central question in ant biology, but especially I think for these bullet ants, how is it that you can have something which is so chunky and proteinaceous? Like their tissues of bullet ants are about 16% nitrogen, which is among the highest in insects because they have these thick and crunchy exoskeletons which have a lot of chitin mixed in with protein. Where does that nitrogen come from if they're not even consuming that much nitrogen? And so one of the studies that I was doing several years ago, usually when scientists say when I was doing this, what they really mean is, well, my students were doing this, right? So when I say it was Hannah, who was my graduate student. But I did work with her on this. And so what we did is we were trying to figure out that perhaps there were these microbes that were living in their guts that were helping them access some of this nitrogen, either convert nitrogen from the air, which otherwise would not be accessible, or from other parts of the environment that are not available as nutrition. And so the microbes then have these molecular mechanisms of converting nitrogen to not being biologically available to making it as food for them. And so we use techniques in the lab to find what these microbes were in their guts that have these genes that allow them to process nitrogen. And so then what we would do is we did an experiment in the field where we mounted either a protein supplement or we would mount up a sugar supplement to these ants. And then we would let them collect that over a couple periods of months. Then we would let them go back to their colonies. Then we would collect them to see if the prevalence of these microbes that would help them process nitrogen would increase or decrease. And so what we actually found was the ants that were collecting the sugar water were actually had more of this microbe which allowed them to convert nitrogen. Which, okay, that's nice and fun. So by the way they collect sugar is like they collect a big droplet of liquid and hold it in their mandibles and carry it around like this. So you can actually grab the ant, like you saw with Erica before, and actually then use a pipette or something and pull out that liquid, and then you can collect it and test it, see what the sugar concentration is, and so on. You just have to be really careful and hold them very firmly with the forceps. If they get out, then you just drop the forceps, right? And so, with that experiment with the microbes, which is kind of interesting, but we spent so much time working in the forest with these animals and run these experiments that we came upon all these other curiosities involving their biology that really wanted to work on. So ever since we did discover that these canopy ants in general are mostly herbivorous, or they mostly have a sugar-based diet, people always thought there's big, fast, roaming predators. It's like, no, they eat sugar. So then the idea is that there's I wouldn't say it's a popular myth, but it's commonly accepted, or people think that they use this high sugar diet in order to be fast and aggressive. So sort of just like how they say kids are on a sugar high and they act funny, that these ants essentially are acting on a sugar high where they have an excess of carbohydrates in their diet. They burn it off by being behaviorally aggressive, because canopy ants are known for being extraordinarily territorial and aggressive in general, including bullet ants. And so we ran a series of experiments where we would watch the ants come down from their nest and look at what they're eating, just to understand what their diet is. So we'd collect them up. When I say we, in this case it was Erica, and then collect the sugar from their mandibles to look at the concentration of the sugar that they're collecting. But also they were collecting prey. And it turns out that their most common prey item by far were actually leafcutter ants, which are actually pretty bad nutrition because a lot of it's not digestible tissue. But still, they collected a huge amount of leafcutter ants. And then so we were asking the question, what are the possible benefits and how do they respond, how do they change in response to variation in space with their diet? And what we found, or what we concluded, is that actually these ants are not collecting, they're not on some sugar high, and bullet ants aren't aggressive necessarily, has anything to do with their sugar. It's that they simply collect it because there's nothing else available. Like the canopy is a relatively harsh environment. It's really hard to hunt up there, and so the sugar is readily available, and so they just take what's there. So this concept that these canopy ants are strong and behaviorally aggressive because they have sugar, there's really no support for that. And so then this other thing that we noticed when we were doing this experiment with feeding them for the microbes is we had a hard time giving them a protein supplement. So if you just put out a tube of sugar water, then they just readily drink from it. They take their palps, they collect it up, and you can actually have an ant walk along, and you can just take a little pipette, and you can feed her, and she'll just collect up the liquid just fine. And she's like, oh, thank you. It's like it's like a little pet, right? If you just poke at it and make her mad, that's something else. But then we tried feeding them a protein liquid, which to my knowledge no one had ever done before. But you usually don't find something like that in nature, like a liquid which has a dissolved protein in it. And there's actually hard to find proteins that actually dissolve well in liquid, but we used digested casein, which does that. And so it turns out that we first put out these tubes of sugar water and tubes of casein. And then we came back and the casein tube was torn apart. It was like a big chunky plastic centrifuge tube, like that big with thick plastic. We came back, it was all gone. It was shredded up in tiny little pieces on the ground. And then we did that, and we went to the other ones. We found the ants were actually ripping it apart and getting pieces of the plastic and hauling it underground. And so what happens is so that didn't work. And so for that experiment, what we ended up doing to give them protein, since we couldn't give them protein in liquid form, we tried experimenting with like making Jell-O in different consistencies or whatever. That didn't quite work because it would go bad and blah, 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 blah. So eventually we ended up just vacuuming huge numbers of leafcutter ants, putting them in the freezer and then putting them out, and that did the job. Like we actually have a big vacuum to vacuum up the leafcutter ants. There are bug vacs that you can buy apparently. And but I wanted to think about, well, what was this issue about about them not taking our liquid protein? And so then we ran these experiments to understand and look at using, blind tests to see how they behaviorally responded to liquids that had different concentrations of sugar and protein. Let me just show you what they did. I have a little movie here. This should work, I hope. Yeah. So here's them drinking liquid, right? And so you can just see them just gathering liquid from the base of that pipette, of the liquid sugar. But let me show you what they do when that pipette has protein in it. She's like chomping at it. And if you were to move it a little bit, then they actually would try stinging it. See, actually you see like her butt has this little thing where she's trying to sting. And the sting, by the way, like is intramuscular, just to let you know, because it's like a really deep, long sting. And so so the way I read this is in nature, they're never used to seeing protein in liquid form. So their brain essentially, and yeah, ants have brains, they connect protein with prey, and it basically triggers an automated response where if they feel protein as a taste, then they need to subdue prey and chomp it and sting it to bring it back home, which is why they chop that all in pieces, which I find kind of an amazing weird thing. And so the equivalent is if you give someone like a protein smoothie, you try to eat it with a fork or something like that, right? Essentially, that's the analogous behavioral response, which I found kind of amazing. And so there's a whole bunch of other questions we'd like to be asking about bullet ants, and we are. Right now in this rainforest, we have more than 100 colonies which we've marked that we've been tracking for the last 10 years, just to study their demography, about how long they live, where they go. Because when an animal lives on the ground but then forages up in the canopy, it's really, really hard to follow. Although now we're starting to get the technology where we can use these RFID and other trackers to actually track their movement up in the canopy, that you can just glue them on the end, and it's possible. Well, people have been doing that with honeybees for the last few years. We can probably do this with the ants. So I've gotten this far, but to talk about bullet ants, I've been stung once. Oh, thanks. If you want to see this again, let me know. And so the person who showed me how to work with them, who's my PhD advisor, so he's actually never been stung, and he's actually dug up a whole colony that had like 2,000 ants and never was stung once. And they're really fast critters. And I said, how did that happen? How did you not get stung? He says he treats them with the respect of venomous snakes. Like if you act like as if it can kill you. Which they can't. It's just really, really painful, but I don't think anyone dies from these at all. But there's a well-known insect photographer named Alex Wild who happened to be at our field site, and my students were at the crew, and they had this wacky idea, hey Alex, let's go out in the forest and you can take pictures of us while we're getting stung by bullet ants. So let me show you a picture of Yahaira when she was doing this, which really, really speaks to it really, really well. Look on her face, right? I mean, it really, really hurts. And so the one time I was stung, it was in the laboratory, and I was just being careless after working with them day after day, and they're generally predictable critters. And so when she stung me on the finger, and I can't use the language that I used, the best analogy that I'm really, truly not exaggerating about what it felt like is if let's say you put your finger on the countertop and someone were to hit it with a hammer as hard as you could, that's pretty much what it feels like. But also imagine how that would entirely crush your finger and how that would be painful, and you'd have all these little pieces of bone. That's kind of what it feels like for several hours on. Like it's painful enough that you take your antihistamine, you take your ibuprofen, and then you just lie down because the whole day is kind of over. Some people have worse reactions rather than others, but and that day, actually in the evening, my hand was just kind of numb, and I didn't have enough muscular strength. I couldn't pick up a cup of coffee. So anyway, that was just one sting. Apparently there are these rights that certain groups in the Amazon have, which if you look it up on YouTube, you can find them, and there's like a Venom dude who had a TV show where they take, a dozen or so of the bullet ants and put them in a burlap bag with the stingers in, and you put your hand in it for 5 minutes, although apparently they're really, really doped up on something else before that happens. I figure they use all their venom within a minute or two. Hopefully I will not get stung again because I still treat them with tremendous amount of respect. So we're still continuing to do experiments on them. I just thought I'd share with you how the more you study an organism, you learn more, but essentially by learning, it opens up more questions. And so I feel like People say I'm an expert on them, but really, I feel like I'm an expert on our ignorance, on what we don't know about them. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. Make sure those bullet ants make it to the kids in the back. They will love that. Mine will love that. I feel like after hearing that, I can apply that lecture to my personal life in the following way. And by I mean Stephen and I, have memorized all the cities Sunday Assembly is in. Ha ha ha. Another thing we do at Sunday Assembly that I really, really like, and people have responded the best to this one segment, and it is just a personal moment. It can be something innocuous, a fun memory. We've had someone speak about eating half a donut. We've had someone speak about video games. We've had someone speak about domestic violence in their own life. We've had someone speak about finding their birth parent because they were adopted. It can run the gambit, and there's always something new to learn. We are always looking for people to do this segment. And my husband, Charles Wesley, is volunteering to do this segment in April. He's shaking his head no because he's just learned about it. But we really would love to hear more. If you don't feel comfortable standing up with a microphone, we have an excellent reader who you type it out, and she reads it, he or she. We have ways of, you can stand behind a screen with the microphone. We just kind of want to hear your story because we really, really enjoy this segment. So please welcome Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Let's see. Oops. I need to time myself because this story has a lot of tangents, and I don't want to go off on too many tangents. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is this story has no point. There's not like a moral or anything like that. Oh, this story has no point. There's no moral or anything like that. It's just kind of nice, and it is the week of Valentine's Day, so it seemed like a good time to tell it. And so this is kind of how I got to San Diego. And I lived in Gainesville, Florida, which I didn't hear in the list, but I know they used to have a Sunday assembly. Not when I lived there. I lived there up until 2003, and I had a pretty good life. I was working at the university, but I was a little bit restless, and I was kind of looking for something more in terms of career, and I was on this quest, and it all had to do with public health and saving the world from big corporations. And so I found this really cool fellowship in San Francisco, and I went out there to spend a month in that summer of 2003. And so while I was there, and I was just like really high on life, which to me kind of relates to the rest of the story, because I think when you are on your mission and feeling good, sometimes you can take more risks and things. So anyway, I decided to fly down to San Diego to visit a friend of mine, Eileen, who was really cool, and she was from Turkey, which was kind of part of it because I was really into this whole international thing. And I didn't even know her very well. I'd actually only spent about a weekend with her before. So I fly down here, and we're gonna be here like Friday through Sunday. And Friday night, she says, well, tomorrow we're gonna go to the beach, and my friend Edward is gonna come over and teach us how to surf. Well, I'm from Florida, and I don't even like the Atlantic waves. I am sure they are actively trying to kill me. But Eileen was like 25, I was almost 40, and I was just trying to be kind of cool, and I'm like, yeah, okay, all right. And so the next day, about 15 minutes before he comes over, she's like, hey, Kristen, I think you're really gonna like Edward. And it's like raising her eyes, and I'm like, huh? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I didn't really know Eileen that well, and I'm like, I couldn't remember if I had told her that for the last 12 years, my major relationships had been with women, and I was just like, huh. I said, I doubt it. I'm not gonna, and I was picturing this 25-year-old California surfer dude, and she tells me a little bit about him, and the whole like German, Peruvian, American thing kind of was like, huh, maybe. And he was like 42. I was like, okay, well. So he walks in, and I wasn't thinking that much of it all, and he just has the sweetest, most goofy smile, and we just connect. And I had this just really calm but excited at the same time feeling. And it was, I don't know, you just know, you kind of just have this, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew everything would be okay and that whatever happened would be great. And so we're going to go to the beach. He's got the surfboard like taking up all the room in his car. And I think in the past, sometimes I would have been like, oh, I want to try to ride with him. But I didn't care. Rode with my other friends. Got to the beach. And it's not like a party with alcohol. It's like noon, maybe, 11:30, Saturday morning. And I'm passing out food to them, Edward and the other two, some strawberries. You know, we had set up for the day. And Edward takes a strawberry from my hand. So it's like this, and he goes like that. Like a little bit more. And I'm like, huh? So, you know, like maybe tried to wait an appropriate amount of time. I give him another strawberry. Same thing happens. And I'm like, oh, you want another strawberry? And at this point, I mean, it was truly like fireworks raining down from the sky. And I mean, just as magic as you can possibly imagine. And we're just looking at each other. We go back to our blankets. We're kind of laying down. And Eileen and her boyfriend at the time, they were kind of having a tense, sort of like this all-day issue. And so Edward and I are just like looking at each other, but we're feeling a little awkward because they're right there. So I say, let's go in the water, forgetting that it's the Pacific Ocean. So we go in the water. It's freezing cold. We don't go very far out at all because there's waves there. And and so I'm just like, who are you? And what are you doing the rest of the weekend? And basically, we kissed right there. And we go back out to the beach, you know, a little bit later. And I tell Eileen what's going on. And she's like, yeah, I kind of thought that might happen. And so we spend the rest of the day together. And that evening, Eileen and the then boyfriend, they were in no mood to go out. So just Edward and I went out. We went to some fancy restaurant in the Gaslamp, which we'd like never have gone to since. But anyway, and he declares it a date. And then I'm thinking, I got a lot of stuff to tell this guy. So I just like found my bliss in San Francisco, and you know, so I say I have like a few things we have to talk about. I don't know if this is for sure going to be a big deal, but it seems like it might be. I'm not saying it is, but if it is, you know, I was going to move to San Francisco probably, and are you willing to move? And he says, well, because I didn't want to bother like going forward if, you know, it's like, why bother? So he says, well, I really need to surf. West coast of North or South America would be okay. I'm like, huh, okay, flexible enough. And so second thing, you know, until today, for the last 10, 12 years, I've been mostly a lesbian. My mom's a lesbian. My best friends are gay. Like, you just got to be okay with that. He's like, okay. And I say, all right, well, like, do you know any gay people? And he's like, maybe one, a friend of an ex, yeah. I'm like, all right. And then I'm like, and I'm a socialist. And he says, and that was like the hardest one of the three. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And he comes from Peru, and they have some issues there. And I'm like, no, like a democratic socialist, you know. I just think everybody has the right to food, shelter, healthcare, housing, education, whether or not we think they deserve it. Or, you know, there's no such thing as not deserving it. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, I can get on board with that. So I'm like, okay, let's go forward. And so the next week, he flies up to San Francisco. We basically commence a kind of crazy long-distance relationship every 3 weeks, flying back and forth across the country. We both had really good and flexible jobs at the time. And that was August 2nd, 2003. And we're still together. So happy Valentine's Day.
On, Aaron? Well, I don't need that anymore. So I'll talk about it. Well, I know Valentine's Day is 360, 50-something days away, but thanks for getting ahead of that. That was awesome. So recently, some friends and I were talking about. Well, the theme for today is Antsy, and Antsy it could mean anxious or uneasy, which is what I was before we started the assembly today, because we were missing some key people. Besides being our song leader, falls also the person who's our tech guru. And so for those of you who are new to Sunday Assembly, just picture this screen actually up on there. That's our screen. We bought that. So usually we're having that up there, and the tech's a lot more cogent and put together. But a bunch of people helped, and we put the thing together today, and here we are. But my friends and I were talking just recently about some of the anxiety that they've had over the course of the last, year plus, or just some of the things that are happening in life, and how antsy they were about that. And one of my friends said, I'm just surprised human beings are still around. And we kind of stand in sentiment because of the horrible things that we have done to ourselves throughout the history and are doing to ourselves, because we live under the threat of nuclear devastation and some of the terrible things that we've done to this little ball in space that we live upon. I understand the sentiment that it's surprising that people are still around, and yet I was thinking, people are so adaptable, and we live in so many different places, and we live in such extreme environments, and just like the ants and the cockroaches and the rats, humans are going to be around for a very, very long time. And then over the course of the weeks, I've been thinking about that more, and I think there's a deeper reason that we're around. More on that in a little bit. So I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to speak plainly about it. I will tell you while I'm telling you, I'm not proud of some of the things I'm going to say, but they're fact. So I started drinking when I was 16 years old, and I pretty much drank straight through my whole adult life, except for 2 years after my cousin drunk drove himself and 2 of his friends into the back of a flatbed pickup, killing all of them. I stopped for 2 years, and 1 year after there I stopped. But other than that, I drank my whole adult life. I would drink every day. I was the kind of drinker. So there's terms of things. So I will say I was alcohol dependent, or I was addicted to alcohol. But I would drink every day after work. I didn't drink at work, but I definitely went into hungover some days at work. And I would get off work and I would go over to the local liquor store where they knew me very well. And I'd have a beer on the way home, or I'd stop and have a beer before I got home. And then I would drink a beer right when I got home, so that the beer that I drank before wouldn't smell on my breath, because it was the beer that I was having right now. On December 21st, 2001, I didn't drink on the way home because I was going to take my young son to a holiday party that his Kung Fu Sifu held every year. It was there was a Kung Fu studio that was just down the street from our house. It was in a strip mall, which had 3 businesses. It had a reptile shop, it had the Kung Fu studio, which has a giant plate glass window, and you could just see all the way into the studio, carpeted, and it was just a big room, and then a plumbing shop. So that's the strip mall. And it was right down from our house. So we got home and we walked over there, and the person who did this, his name is Dwight Love. Dwight Love is a Sifu. In monkey style. I know Dwight from, he and I were in theater productions of The Monkey King, which we traveled many places in the US doing the story. He played the Monkey King and I often played Pigsy. So that's how I knew him, but he is also an educator in town. He works for the San Diego High School District, and he is a very, very talented jazz musician, and just like one of the most warm-hearted, best people I've ever met. He's just never a bad word for anyone. It's just a super kind guy that could kick your ass. So he had this thing every year, and now we lived in La Mesa, and La Mesa, for those of you who may know, some parts of La Mesa, there's a little downtown, and it's really like a small town community. You do know your neighbors. You see, when you go to the store, it's really rare where you don't see somebody that you know, either from the school or the band or something where my son was involved in, or just our neighbors. So it had that small town feel, and this event was like it was just lovely. It was people brought food, and there's dozens of kids running around and people having nice conversation, and Dwight and his band playing jazz in the background, and it was just lovely. So I pulled my son out of there. It's dark now, and it's probably a little bit earlier than he would have liked to have left, but I really wanted a drink. So we walked the block back to our house, and it was December. It was cold for San Diego, and we got home, and I pulled a beer out of the refrigerator, and I slammed that one down, and I drank another one, so I get up to the level that I needed to be at that time of night. And I was on my third beer when my son said he left his coat at the Kung Fu studio. So I hadn't drank that day because I didn't want to smell like beer. Obviously, I didn't want to embarrass my son or myself in public with all these people that we knew. So we walked back over there together. He was 6 at the time, so I couldn't send him back to get his coat by himself. I didn't feel comfortable doing that, even though it was a block away. So I stood outside the plate glass windows. I watched my son walk into the Kung Fu studio. And so I'm standing in the dark, looking at this warm scene inside with all the families and kids running around. And I see my son get his coat. He doesn't come back out. He starts talking to some of the kids and some of the other parents. And it's minutes and minutes go by. And he's coming closer to the door. I'm watching this whole thing. And he stops at Dwight, who's sitting in a chair in the middle of the room, guitar in his lap, just kind of picking away. And Dwight says something to him in a very kind, intimate, soft way. And my son's 6. I could see his bright eyes looking up at Dwight. And I could tell that Dwight was telling him something that really made him feel good. Something intimate that really made him feel good. I could just tell. And I felt so lonely. I felt so separate. And I saw something that I wanted more than anything else in my life. And that was to be able to have that human connection, to be able to be connected with people, because I had separated myself from people. My son came out, and we walked home, and I have not had a drink since then, 17 years later. So, a couple of things. When I say why humans have been around, or they'll be around, because we help each other. We help each other. Sometimes it's one person that helps you. Sometimes it's a group of people. That's what we do. I see it every day. I dropped my wife off at work the other day, and I watched in the rearview mirror as she rushed over to help open the door for somebody that had things in their hands. I was at my food court at my business, and this guy in disheveled clothing came up, and he was buying a slice of pizza. A slice of pizza is $2 where I work, and he had $2, but it's $2.14 with tax. He didn't have the money, and he started walking away. The lady next to him said, "I'll get that." She put it on her bill. No hesitation. I see it every day, all the time. Coming here today, I was a little worried because we had a bunch of people that were missing, some key people, but people came and just said, "What can I do to help?" That's just our nature. And last week, when we learned of people that just put themselves in harm's way and took a bullet and who are now dead because they helped other people. That's just what we do. So it's easy to think that life's not that way. It's easy to see the knuckleheads that do the things that they do and are unkind, but I don't believe it. I don't believe it for an instant. I think people are good, and I do believe that all we really want to do is help each other. It's a natural instinct, and that's why I think we'll be around for a very long time. I tell this particular story for a couple of reasons. One is, from 16 till I'm almost 58 now, with the 2 years plus the 1 year that I didn't drink and the almost 17 years that I haven't drank right now, I'm really right. This isn't the day exactly, but I'm at the halfway point where I'm over the line where I've had been more alive, not drunk as an adult, drunk. So that's a good one. And also, today happens to be the 22nd birthday of my son Lowell, who is sitting right over there. So, really nice birthday present for me. Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting you to come here today, so it's really great. And then we have Sunday Assembly, which is this is a radically inclusive community. We're welcoming of people who welcome people and accepting of people who accept people. And we want this to be a safe place for all of you. So we just really appreciate having you here. I'll tell you what we're going to do is we are going to try this sing-along, and thank you, Denise, for helping me to see. Oh, she disappeared. I saw that. So here's what I'd like to do. But first, we're going to do some announcements. But I'm explaining the whole thing. So here's what we're going to do. We have a couple things. We are going to have a breakout session after a moment of silence. So one thing we do at the breakout sessions is there's some numbers on the floor. So if you would just go, when we break out, you're just going to go over to a number, and one of the organizers will be there. And the thing we're going to talk about in our breakout session is for each of you to tell the group that you're with a story about one person that had an influence on your life. One person who had a positive influence on your life, And before we do that, we will have a moment of silence so you can think about who that is. Okay, if I can ask organizers, if you would, each of you take a spot there, and 5 or 6 people in each space should do it. And we'll give this about 10 minutes, and then we'll come wrangle you after that. Thanks.
All right. We're wrapping things up. If you guys can make it back to your seat. And thank you so much for sharing your inspirational people in your life. All right, as you're making your way back to your seat, I kind of wanted to share the person I talked about in my group was my mom, who was I don't want to use the word teacher because she got married when she was 16 and didn't have her credential and never went to college, but I grew up in a cult that didn't believe in it. We were anti-education. For science class, I actually learned about ants and what the Bible says about them, which is in Proverbs, and it goes, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no overseer or ruler," because the infallible word of God didn't know about queen ants, "provides her supply in the winter, gathers in the harvest." So, science. So my mom worked at that church school and was a buffer between the people in power and those who were vulnerable, and I will always appreciate that about her forever. She was my inspiration. So I think we're all back to our seats now, and we have some announcements. If you are giving an announcement, if you could make your way up to the podium. The first announcement? Okay.
We're having a very professional day today. So this year we are going to be doing. We're going to be doing something new for the Pride Parade Festival. This year, Sunday Assembly will be participating in both the Pride Parade and we'll be running a festival booth. So I need you all to reach into your closets, pull out your rainbow flags, your bandanas, find your sparkly unicorns. I may or may not be available for rent. Because we're going to need all of y'all to come and help us. So please join us the weekend of the 14th and the 15th in July for the Pride Parade and the Pride Festival. Hope to see you there. Aaron, how long do you Fourth festival / Pride Parade? 4th March? 3rd March? 3rd March. This will be our 4th, yeah. Yes.
The first Sunday Assembly of the month should do a Pride Parade.
Hello. Next Saturday, I am hosting a picnic and a walkthrough of the Living Coast Discovery Center in Chula Vista. It's a nonprofit organization that teaches families and school. They do outings to schools and to educate children on basically the living coast, on the wildlife that is found up and down the western coast of the United States. And I would love for you to join me. All the details are on Meetup. Thank you.
I also want to announce that we're having a chili cook-off. This is our second annual chili cook-off. That is happening right after the assembly. So here's what we'll do is once we finish here, and I'm going to ask a couple of people said they would help me. We're going to try to get this song done because we've got to have a song for Sunday Assembly. We have to. That Denise spurred me on for that. So I appreciate that, Denise. And I know she's evacuated the area, so that's... She's way back there. So what we'll do is when we after we're done with the singing, we have coffee, cookies, conversation, community for just a little bit while we set the chili up in the back there. And if you want to be a judge for the chili contest, chili's free. But if you'd like to be a judge for the contest and be assured of having one of each of the 5 chilies over there, we're asking for a $10 donation, and you can be a judge. So we'll set up over there. We'll get the judges back there to taste each of the chilies, and then we'll let everybody back there. And that's what we normally do. We usually go over to Pizzicato or whatever the name of that place is now, and hang out there. But we'll be hanging out here till for a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. And so if I can get my yes, ma'am. What's that? Okay, you guys come on up. So here, Leah's going to come. Aaron, if you know the song and you want to come up, and if it's everybody, that's great. Come on up. We're going to just play it. You got the lyrics right there. Listen, you know the refrain here, so sing that one out loudly and proudly. And if you're reading off your lyrics, hold those lyrics up so we're singing out there. And come on, Aaron, you want to come on in? And if you are able to, and you'd like to stand up, go ahead and stand up. And we are going to give this a shot. I need lyrics. Do you have lyrics?
Well, I do.
Okay. Gotta have a song.
Darling, you know that I have from the start. So build me up, buttercup, don't break my heart.
Adaptable, we did it. Thank you all for attending Sunday Assembly. Remember, we're the third Sunday of the month, 11 o'clock right here, and we'll have the tech and singing next time. Thank you so much for being here.